Ma'am, stop! Officer Marcus Patterson's voice cracked like a whip across the courthouse steps. His hand shot to his weapon, his posture rigid, blocking the path of a black woman in a charcoal grey suit. Victoria Johnson didn't flinch.
Shut up and stay down!
She held her briefcase tight at her side, her stride steady as the marble stairs rose before her. "I have a hearing to attend," she said evenly. "Not without ID, you don't." Patterson's voice was hard, his palm hovering over the holster like it had been waiting for this moment. The federal courthouse buzzed with its usual rhythm, reporters adjusting cameras, families whispering anxiously, lawyers in expensive suits hurrying inside. But Patterson's voice cut through the air like a blade. The crowd slowed, eyes turning, phones sliding out of pockets as people sensed something was about to happen. Victoria stopped just long enough to meet his eyes. "Officer, you're making a serious mistake." "The mistake," Patterson snapped, "is you thinking you can walk into my courthouse. I've been doing security here 18 years. I know who belongs and who doesn't." The weight of his words spread like gasoline on dry leaves. A hush swept across the steps as tension thickened. People stopped mid-step. Cameras tilted upward. Dozens of witnesses waited for the explosion. Victoria stepped forward again, calm, controlled, determined. "Let me through." "Stop moving," Patterson barked, his hand tightening around his weapon. Victoria reached for her jacket pocket. "I'm just getting my ID." But Patterson's fear warped into fury. "She's reaching for a gun." Bang. The thunderclap echoed off the marble pillars. Victoria spun, her body jerking from the impact. She crashed onto the steps, clutching her shoulder as her briefcase burst open, documents scattering like shards of evidence in the wind. Screams erupted. "Oh my God, she's down!" "Call 911. Phones rose like a forest of witnesses, capturing every second, every frame. Patterson stood frozen, smoke curling from his barrel, his weapon trembling in his hands. For a heartbeat, he didn't move. For a heartbeat, he didn't breathe. Then, through the chaos, Victoria's voice rose, sharp, surgical, unshaken. "Officer Patterson." He flinched at the sound of his own name. "My name is Victoria Johnson. I am the federal prosecutor for the 2 p.m. hearing in courtroom 6. Gasps rippled across the crowd. Patterson's face drained. His weapon shook violently as the truth crashed down on him like stone. "The hearing," she continued, forcing herself upright, her shoulder bleeding but her eyes burning, "that you just shot me to prevent me from attending." The marble steps of the courthouse, the very symbol of justice, had transformed into a crime scene. Yellow tape unfurled in the afternoon wind. Reporters shouted into microphones. Witnesses pressed record on every angle of his downfall. And through it all, Victoria stood, wounded, bleeding, but unbroken. "Officer Patterson," she said, her voice cold as iron, "you are under arrest." Phones zoomed in. Headlines were born. An 18-year career shattered in one moment of violence, caught live on hundreds of cameras. For the first time in his career, Marcus Patterson wasn't the man enforcing the law. He was the man breaking it. Paramedics rushed up the courthouse steps, sirens wailing in the distance, yellow tape snapping in the afternoon wind. They leaned toward her, hands already reaching for gauze and stretchers. "Ma'am, you need immediate medical attention," one insisted. Victoria pressed a handkerchief hard against her bleeding shoulder and shook her head. The hearing takes precedence. Justice doesn't wait for medical attention. Reporters gasped. Cameras zoomed in. The image of a wounded federal prosecutor refusing care spread like wildfire across every social feed. Hashtags ignited within minutes. Hashtag justice bleeds but stands. Hashtag accountability now. Hashtag courthouse shooting live. Officer Patterson, his wrists now cuffed by fellow officers, watched in horror. The crowd that once nodded with respect at his badge now glared with disgust. 18 years of service crumbled with each passing second. Detective Sarah Martinez of Internal Affairs stormed through the chaos. Her voice was sharp, commanding. "Patterson, what the hell happened here?" She reached for something," he stammered. "I thought she had a gun." "Protect what?" Martinez's glare cut him down. The courthouse from a federal prosecutor? Phones caught every word. His excuses fell flat, swallowed by the roar of disbelief. Meanwhile, Victoria bent down with one good arm, gathering the papers scattered from her briefcase. Each document she lifted felt like another nail in Patterson's coffin. Around her, whispers grew louder. "She's the prosecutor. He shot a prosecutor." Her colleagues arrived, faces pale with shock. Assistant U.S. Attorney James Wright tried to take the files from her hands. "Victoria, this can wait. You've been shot. Let us reschedule." She snapped the briefcase shut, her voice firm. "No, Patterson's actions will not derail justice. In fact, they've guaranteed it." Detective Martinez approached with a folder clutched tight. "Prosecutor Johnson, I pulled Patterson's personnel file. You're going to want to see this." Victoria opened it and her eyes darkened. Page after page detailed complaints. Excessive force, racial bias incidents, civilian misconduct reports, all dismissed, buried, or ignored. She held the file up for the cameras. This shooting wasn't an accident. It was inevitable. The media frenzy exploded. News vans clogged the street. Satellite dishes tilted skyward like metal prayers. Michael Torres, a veteran courthouse reporter, held his microphone high. "Ladies and gentlemen, in 30 years of covering legal proceedings, I have never witnessed anything like this. A federal prosecutor shot on the courthouse steps, now refusing to postpone her case. This isn't just news. This is history." Inside the building, clerks and marshals pressed against windows, watching the chaos below. Word spread through the hallways like lightning. A prosecutor had been shot, and she was still going forward with the hearing. Federal Marshal Robert Davis pushed through the doors, his presence commanding silence. "Prosecutor Johnson, this is now a federal incident. We're treating it as an assault on a federal official." "Which it is," Victoria replied coolly. "But, Marshal, let me be clear. I intend to proceed with the scheduled hearing." Davis hesitated. "The media attention will be unprecedented. You'll be walking into a storm." She looked up at the grand columns, at the building that symbolized justice itself. "Good," she said. "Let America watch." Patterson sagged in his cuffs, hearing every word. His fellow officers refused to look him in the eye. He had not only disgraced himself, he had tainted them all. The paramedic returned. "Clean exit wound. 2 inches to the left, and we'd be having a very different conversation." "Then luck," Victoria said as she adjusted her jacket, "is on the side of justice today." She gathered her papers, straightened her torn suit, and began climbing the steps again. Cameras followed, reporters shouted. Every click of her heels echoed louder than the shot that had tried to silence her. "Courtroom 6, she told Marshal Davis. Judge Eleanor Brooks presiding. The double doors opened wide. Inside, whispers rippled as news spread faster than fire. The prosecutor who was shot is here. She's walking into court right now. Bailiff Thomas Washington bellowed, "All rise for the Honorable Judge Eleanor Brooks." The room stood. And when Victoria Johnson entered, her jacket torn, her shoulder bloodied, her gaze steady, a collective gasp swept the chamber. The symbol of justice wasn't crumbling. It was walking into court, wounded but unbroken. The mahogany-panelled chamber of Courtroom 6 thrummed with tension. Every seat was filled, attorneys in tailored suits, clerks whispering nervously, reporters scribbling furiously. Even the marble walls seemed to lean in, eager to witness history. Judge Eleanor Brooks, dignified in her black robe, scanned the packed gallery. Her voice carried authority carved from 3 decades on the bench. "Be seated." All eyes turned as Victoria Johnson rose at the prosecutor's table. The wound on her shoulder was stark, her jacket torn, crimson bleeding through white cloth, but her posture was unbending. "Yes, Your Honor," she declared, her voice sharp as glass. 30 minutes ago I was shot by Officer Marcus Patterson on these very courthouse steps. She lifted her blood-stained handkerchief for all to see. That assault was not random. It was calculated. Gasps rippled across the chamber. Court reporters froze mid-keystroke. Even Judge Brooks leaned forward, her normally calm expression betraying shock. "And yet you are here to proceed?" the judge asked. "I am," Victoria replied, steel laced through every word. Justice does not pause because corruption fires a bullet. The rear doors banged open with a heavy thud. The air shifted. Marcus Patterson shuffled inside, shackled in cuffs, flanked by 2 federal agents. His uniform was gone, replaced by plain prison clothes that stripped him of his authority. The sight was jarring. The man who had carried a badge for 18 years, now reduced to a criminal defendant under the glares of hundreds. Victoria turned to face him, her gaze icy. "Your Honor," she said, her words like a hammer against stone, "I move to add charges against Officer Patterson, assault on a federal official, discharge of a firearm in commission of a felony, and violation of civil rights under color of law." Judge Brooks's eyebrows lifted. "Counselor, these are extraordinary circumstances." "Yes," Victoria countered, "and extraordinary circumstances demand extraordinary accountability." The defense attorney, Lisa Thompson, sprang up. "Objection, Your Honor. My client has not been properly arraigned, and—" Judge Brooks cut her off with a raised hand. "Counselor, your client shot a federal prosecutor in broad daylight, in front of dozens of witnesses. The court will hear the prosecution." The defense wilted. Patterson's face turned a shade paler, sweat shining on his brow. Victoria set her briefcase on the table and opened it with a deliberate click. Inside, instead of the expected papers and binders, lay a small silver recording device. She lifted it high for the courtroom to see. "Your Honor, for the past 3 months I have been running a federal investigation into corruption inside this courthouse. Patterson wasn't just a rogue officer. He was a cog in a criminal machine." The defense attorney leapt up again. "Speculation." "Not speculation," Victoria said coldly, pressing play. Patterson's voice filled the courtroom, captured in crystal clarity. "Look, Martinez, these federal types come sniffing around, asking questions. Sometimes they need to be discouraged, ways that don't leave paperwork." The gallery erupted. Reporters scrambled to record every word. Judge Brooks slammed her gavel. "Order, order in this court," but there was no order. Not after hearing proof that courthouse security had been threatening federal investigators. Patterson's face drained of all color. Victoria clicked again. Another recording. "That Johnson prosecutor is asking questions about the Williams case. She's getting too close to our arrangement with the evidence lockup." The voice was unmistakable. Patterson's. And then, silence. Not a whisper stirred in the chamber. His own words had just betrayed him. Judge Brooks leaned forward, her voice cold. "Mr. Patterson, did you or did you not make these statements?" His lips moved, but no words came out. His attorney tugged at his sleeve, whispering frantically. But Patterson sat frozen, like a man watching the walls of his life collapse brick by brick. Victoria stepped closer to the jury box, her blood-stained jacket now a badge of defiance. She lifted a thick file from her briefcase and slapped it onto the table. "This," she announced, "is Officer Patterson's personnel file. 3 excessive force complaints, 2 racial bias investigations, 5 civilian complaints, all buried, all dismissed, and all leading to this moment." She snapped open the binder, flipping pages with deliberate fury. This was not one bad day. This was years of corruption, covered up by those who protected him. Today's shooting was inevitable. The gallery murmured. Some jurors looked ill. Reporters' pens scratched furiously, feeding stories that would dominate headlines before the ink was even dry. Patterson finally found his voice, hoarse and trembling. "She's lying. This is fabricated. I was protecting the courthouse." "Protecting it?" Victoria's voice cut like a blade. "Protecting it from what? From justice? From accountability?" She held up the recording device again. "Because according to your own words, Officer Patterson, you knew exactly who I was. You knew exactly why I was here, and you tried to silence me with a bullet." She clicked play one last time. Patterson's voice echoed through the courtroom. "Victoria Johnson, if she shows up tomorrow, we might have a problem." Silence. Deadly, suffocating silence. Judge Brooks broke it with 6 words that sealed his fate. "Add perjury to the charge list." The courthouse had just transformed into something far greater than a trial. It had become the stage where years of corruption were about to unravel, piece by piece, recording by recording, and Patterson knew it. The air in courtroom 6 had shifted into something electric, every breath charged with the sense that the truth was about to rip through the walls. Patterson sat slumped at the defense table, chains clinking softly with each twitch of his trembling hands. His attorney whispered desperately, but the man looked hollow, already broken by the weight of his own words echoing in the chamber. Victoria Johnson moved deliberately toward the evidence table, her wounded shoulder stiff, but her presence towering over every man in the room. Her voice, sharp and deliberate, sliced through the silence. "Your Honor, the recordings prove intent. But intent is only the beginning. What I am about to submit into evidence exposes years of rot in this courthouse." She reached into her briefcase again and pulled out a thick black leather ledger. Its cover cracked, its edges worn, but its contents poisonous enough to destroy careers. She dropped it onto the table with a sound like a gavel striking. Patterson's head shot up. His eyes widened in horror. Judge Brooks tilted her head. "Counselor Johnson, what is this?" Victoria flipped the book open, revealing neat, handwritten entries in blue ink. Each line was meticulous, almost obsessive. This, she announced, holding it high for the jury and gallery to see, is Officer Marcus Patterson's personal ledger. His handwritten record of bribes, payments, cases fixed, evidence destroyed, and witnesses intimidated. The words dropped like bombs. Gasps erupted from every corner of the courtroom. Reporters nearly tripped over each other, fumbling to capture the moment. Victoria began to read. Page 47. Payment received, $5,000 from defense attorney Mark Stevens for losing key evidence in United States versus Thompson. She turned another page. Page 52. Payment received, $8,000 from attorney Rebecca Foster for intimidating witness Maria Gonzalez. Patterson's attorney jumped to her feet, voice cracking. Objection! Hearsay, unverified. Judge Brooks's gaze cut like a razor. Counselor Thompson, are you seriously suggesting your client didn't write in his own handwriting? The defense attorney faltered. Patterson buried his face in his shackled hands. Victoria flipped through more pages, her voice relentless. Page 61. Payment received, $12,000 from attorney David Kim for ensuring favorable jury selection in United States versus Anderson. Page 72. Payment received, $15,000 to suppress forensic reports in United States versus Morrison. Every entry was another nail hammered into Patterson's professional coffin. The gallery stared in horrified silence as his criminal empire was exposed line by line. Finally, Victoria slammed the ledger shut. Your Honor, I count 137 separate acts of corruption documented right here, in the defendant's own handwriting. Judge Brooks leaned back, visibly shaken. In 30 years on this bench, I have never seen anything like this. The judge turned her gaze directly on Patterson. Mr. Patterson, is this ledger yours? The silence stretched. Patterson's jaw trembled, his shoulders sagged. He finally nodded once, barely perceptible, but enough. The courtroom gasped. Judge Brooks's gavel struck like thunder. Let the record reflect that the defendant has acknowledged authorship. Victoria wasn't finished. She lifted the ledger again, her wounded arm shaking but steady. And, Your Honor, this book is not just evidence of one man's corruption. It is the map to an entire network inside this courthouse. She opened another section. This time, names filled the page. Detective Sarah Martinez, Captain Robert Davis, Lieutenant Michael Thompson. Every one of them, Victoria said, her voice ice, is implicated. This ledger reveals not just a single officer gone rogue, but a system, a conspiracy operating in plain sight under the roof of justice. The defense attorney slammed her hand on the table. This is outrageous. You can't. But before she could finish, the courtroom doors burst open. A team of FBI agents in tactical gear stormed in, their black uniforms marked with bright yellow lettering. Special Agent Jennifer Adams stepped forward, holding a thick packet of warrants. Your Honor, Adams said firmly, we have federal arrest warrants for Detective Martinez, Captain Davis, and Lieutenant Thompson. They are already being taken into custody as we speak. The entire courtroom erupted. Reporters leapt to their feet. Jurors covered their mouths in shock. Attorneys whispered in disbelief. Patterson's head snapped toward the doors, his eyes wide with raw terror. His network, his safety net, was unraveling before his very eyes. Victoria's voice rose over the chaos. Officer Patterson thought a single gunshot would silence me. Instead, it exposed everything. This ledger is the key that unlocks years of systemic corruption, and the arrests happening right now are only the beginning. She stepped closer to Patterson, her presence overwhelming despite her blood-stained jacket. "You didn't just pull a trigger on those courthouse steps, officer. You pulled the trigger on your entire criminal enterprise." The gallery gasped, phones raised high as if they were recording history in real time. The courtroom, once a temple of law, had transformed into a battlefield, and Victoria Johnson was leading the charge. The ledger had cracked open the rotten foundation of the courthouse. But Victoria knew the infection ran deeper, far beyond these walls. The true scale of Operation Cleanhouse was only beginning to emerge. The gavel's last strike still echoed when the courtroom doors flew open again. The FBI agents who had stormed in weren't just there for show. They had come prepared to dismantle the rot Patterson's ledger had exposed. Special Agent Jennifer Adams strode to the front, handing Judge Brooks a stack of documents bound so tightly they looked like weapons themselves. "Your Honor, Operation Cleanhouse is officially underway. These warrants authorize the seizure of files, devices, and communications across multiple departments tied to this conspiracy." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Attorneys shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Reporters' pens scratched like mad, every word now front-page material. Judge Brooks adjusted her glasses, scanning the warrants. "This court will not obstruct federal jurisdiction. Proceed." And with that, chaos broke free. Outside, across the city, sirens wailed. Black SUVs screeched into parking lots, agents pouring into precincts and offices. Captain Davis was pulled from his desk mid-shout, handcuffed in front of his stunned staff. Detective Sarah Martinez was led out of her squad car in broad daylight, neighbors filming from sidewalks. Lieutenant Thompson, once the loudest defender of Patterson's record, was caught shredding documents in his basement office. Each arrest added fuel to the fire. Social feeds lit up, #Operation Cleanhouse, #Justice Unchained, #No One Above the Law. Inside courtroom 6, the spectators had forgotten to breathe. The once ordinary trial was now the epicenter of a nationwide scandal. Victoria Johnson, standing tall despite the blood staining her suit, leaned into the microphone. "Your Honor, what began as an excessive force complaint has revealed itself to be a systemic network of corruption. Patterson's ledger isn't just an account book. It's a blueprint for the destruction of trust in this courthouse." Victoria leaned forward, her wounded shoulder trembling but her voice unshaken. "With respect, Your Honor, you just proved my point." Every camera in the gallery zoomed closer. The nation was watching, live, as trust in the system cracked wider. Patterson slumped in his chair, sweat rolling down his face. "You think it stops here," he muttered. "It goes higher. You can't even imagine how high." The courtroom went deathly silent. And then, from the back, an unfamiliar voice cut through the tension. "He's right." Every head turned. A man in a dark suit, badge flashing, DOJ Inspector General's office. "I'm here under direct order of the Attorney General." "Judge Brooks, Counselor Johnson, this proceeding is now under federal protective review. Effective immediately, all communications are sealed." The conspiracy Patterson described doesn't stop at courthouse doors. It extends to Washington. The room erupted into chaos again, but Victoria only exhaled slowly. She had known this wasn't just about one officer, one courthouse, or even one city. Now it was confirmed. The infection ran higher, deeper, deadlier. And she wasn't about to back down. The chamber air shifted, charged with a new kind of electricity, as the man from the DOJ Inspector General's office stepped fully into the light. His voice was calm, but the words carried the weight of Washington itself. By directive of the Attorney General, he announced, this proceeding is no longer under local jurisdiction. Effective immediately, Courtroom 6 is federal command ground. Operation Cleanhouse is escalated to Phase 2. Gasps swept the gallery. Reporters whispered frantic notes into recorders. Attorneys clutched their briefcases as if the floor itself had shifted beneath their feet. Judge Brooks's gavel came down hard. This is my courtroom. I will not be overruled in my own house. But the DOJ official didn't flinch. He slid a sealed document across to the bench. With respect, Your Honor, you've already been overruled. By Washington. Read it. For the first time that day, Judge Brooks hesitated. The tremor in her hands betrayed her as she scanned the order. The cameras caught it all, the respected judge of 30 years faltering under federal scrutiny. Victoria stood at the prosecution's table, her face pale but her voice steady. Your Honor, with your permission, the people's case must continue uninterrupted. If we allow even an hour of delay, this network will erase itself. Judge Brooks lowered the paper, her jaw set tight. Permission granted. The gavel slammed again, but the authority had shifted. This wasn't her courtroom anymore. Agent Adams moved forward, setting a black case on the evidence table. With a click, it opened to reveal a hardened tablet streaming live feeds from across the nation. Counselor Johnson, the arrests have begun, she said. Phase 2 raids are underway in Los Angeles, Miami, Chicago, New York, and Houston. Patterson's handlers are being taken down as we speak. The screen flashed with grainy live drone footage, federal agents swarming luxury mansions, law offices, and private hangars. Men in suits shoved into black vans, evidence boxes sealed and stacked. The courtroom gallery erupted, phones raised high as America watched corruption fall city by city. She held up the black ledger again, its pages trembling in her hands. 137 acts of corruption, dozens of names, hundreds of tainted cases. And now, Your Honor, the American people are watching. Phones in the gallery were raised like a sea of eyes, every live stream broadcasting the fall of Patterson's empire in real time. At the defense table, Patterson's body shook. The chains on his wrists clinked with every tremor. His attorney whispered, "Don't say a word." But Patterson's control was gone. His face crumpled. He slammed his fists onto the table, chains rattling like a dying engine. "It wasn't supposed to go this far," he shouted, his voice cracking. The gallery erupted in gasps. Judge Brooks's gavel hammered. "Control yourself, Mr. Patterson." But Patterson wasn't done. He leaned forward, his eyes bloodshot, his words frantic. "You don't get it. I wasn't the only one. We had protection, judges, attorneys, marshals. You think this ends with me?" The courtroom froze. His attorney sank back in her chair, defeated. Victoria stepped forward, her eyes unflinching. "Mr. Patterson, thank you for confirming what the ledger already told us." Special Agent Adams addressed the judge. "Your Honor, based on Patterson's statements and this ledger, the Bureau will begin reviewing every case he or his associates touched. This may affect thousands of convictions across the state." The gallery erupted again, some horrified, some vindicated. Families of convicted defendants clutched each other, whispering hope for appeals. Victims of police misconduct wiped tears, realizing their voices might finally be heard. Judge Brooks steadied her voice. This court will fully cooperate with federal review. Every tainted case will be re-examined. Justice will not be a casualty of this corruption. Victoria returned to her seat, her body heavy but her resolve iron. She whispered to herself, almost like a prayer. They tried to stop me with a bullet, but all they did was aim the spotlight. Her assistant, James Wright, leaned close. Victoria, you realize what you've started? This isn't a case anymore. This is a purge. She met his eyes. Good. Because corruption doesn't die in silence. It dies in sunlight. Outside the courthouse, crowds swelled. Protesters lifted signs reading "Clean House Now" and "Justice Doesn't Bleed Alone." Reporters gave live updates, their voices cracking with urgency. Helicopters circled overhead, the entire city holding its breath as one woman's stand tore apart decades of rot. And in the middle of it all, Officer Marcus Patterson sat shackled, his name forever etched not as a protector of justice, but as the man who exposed just how fragile the system truly was. The network was crumbling, but Victoria knew the fight wasn't over. Patterson's outburst hinted at something darker, something higher. Judges, marshals, names too powerful to be written in a ledger, and if they were watching, they wouldn't go down quietly. The hum of whispered shock had barely faded when Judge Brooks leaned forward, her gaze steady but her fingers tightening around the gavel. This court will recess for 30 minutes while federal agents process the evidence. But Victoria Johnson didn't sit. Her voice cut sharp and clear. With respect, Your Honour, a recess is exactly what Patterson's allies are counting on. Give them time, and files vanish, witnesses recant, and bank accounts empty. We can't pause. Not now. Gasps rippled through the courtroom again. Judge Brooks fixed her with a look that balanced irritation with admiration. Councillor Johnson, are you suggesting this court itself is unsafe? Victoria held her ground. I'm not suggesting, Your Honour. I'm warning. In that instant, Agent Adams rushed forward with a phone in her hand, her face pale. Councillor Johnson, this just came in. She handed the device to Victoria. On the screen, a grainy live feed of Victoria's townhouse. A shadowy figure paced the porch. The text below it read, "Walk away, or the next bullet won't miss." The gallery gasped as Victoria's jaw tightened. She handed the phone to Judge Brooks. This is what happens when you shine light on darkness. They lash back. Judge Brooks studied the screen, her lips pressed thin. For a moment, her composure cracked. "Marshal Davis," she snapped, "secure Councillor Johnson's residence immediately. Full tactical detail. No one gets near that home." But Victoria wasn't finished. She turned to Patterson, who sat trembling in chains. "You're not their leader. You're a pawn. Who's pulling the strings?" Patterson's lips trembled, his face pale. He opened his mouth, then hesitated. His eyes flickered, not at Victoria, not at the jury, but toward the bench, toward Judge Brooks. The silence was suffocating. Then Patterson muttered, barely audible, "They'll kill me if I speak." The words detonated like dynamite in the chamber. The gavel hammered. Judge Brooks's voice was iron. "This courtroom will maintain order. Mr. Patterson, you will confine yourself to testimony relevant to your defense." But murmurs swept the gallery. Did Patterson just imply a sitting federal judge was part of the network? Was Judge Brooks compromised? Victoria's eyes locked on the judge. She saw it, the faintest flicker in Brooks's expression. Not guilt, not shock. Something far more dangerous. Fear. Agent Adams broke the tension. Your Honor, FBI Command confirms Patterson's ledger matches sealed files from 3 federal cases presided over by judges in this very district. The gallery erupted again. Reporters scrambled for calls. Defendants' families wept. This wasn't just courthouse security. The corruption had seeped into the bench itself. Victoria seized the moment. Your Honor, with respect, if federal judges are implicated, including potentially this court, we cannot rely on ordinary procedure. Operation Cleanhouse must continue under direct Department of Justice oversight. The judge's gavel slammed down, louder this time. Enough, Counselor. Her voice thundered across the chamber, but it carried something else too: strain.
The words hung heavy, echoing louder than the gavel. Even Judge Brooks froze, her lips pressed thin as she watched the fire in Victoria's eyes. Patterson smirked, his chains rattling. You've no idea what hornet's nest you've kicked. You're not saving justice. You're dismantling it. Victoria stepped closer, her wounded shoulder trembling but her stare unshaken. No, Patterson. We're saving it from you. Suddenly, the tablet screen flickered. A new live feed filled the courtroom monitors, Washington, D.C. itself. Federal agents swarmed the marble steps of a government building. Headlines ticked across the bottom of the feed in real time: breaking, DOJ raids. Ongoing in nation's capital, multiple federal officials arrested. The courtroom fell into stunned silence. For the first time, it wasn't just one courthouse on trial. It was the entire system. The nation was watching live as the DOJ stripped its own skin bare, exposing corruption at the highest levels. And in the middle of it all stood Victoria Johnson, the federal prosecutor they tried to silence with a bullet. Now holding the megaphone of history, the monitors in courtroom 6 glowed like fire against the polished mahogany walls, showing scenes that no one in America had ever imagined they would see. Washington itself was burning, not with flames, but with accountability. The Capitol steps swarmed with tactical agents. Men and women in expensive suits were led away in handcuffs, their faces hidden behind newspapers or bowed in shame. Black sedans screeched to a halt, disgorging agents who stormed marble halls that once felt untouchable. Reporters screamed questions over the chaos. Senator, did you take the payments? Judge, were you involved in Operation Cleanhouse? But there were no answers. Only the click of handcuffs. In courtroom 6, Judge Brooks gripped her gavel, but the courtroom was no longer hers to control. Everyone's eyes were locked on the feeds. The DOJ official spoke into his earpiece, then addressed the room. Phase 3 is live. Targets at the highest levels of government are in custody. This isn't just a courthouse scandal anymore. It's a federal reckoning. The gallery gasped. Attorneys scribbled frantic notes. Journalists whispered into their microphones, their voices shaking with disbelief. Victoria stood, her posture defiant despite the blood seeping through her bandaged shoulder. This is what corruption looks like when you drag it into the light. Senators, judges, prosecutors, the very people sworn to protect justice, selling it piece by piece. Patterson sneered from the defense table, his voice dripping with venom. And you think tearing it all down makes you a hero? You'll break this country before you save it. Victoria turned slowly, her eyes burning. Better a broken system rebuilt with truth than a rotten one preserved with lies. Her words hit like a thunderclap. The gallery erupted in applause before marshals restored order. The screens shifted again, this time to FBI headquarters. Agents in dark jackets escorted one of their own out in chains. The cheer blazed. FBI special agent arrested in Doge corruption sweep. The room fell into stunned silence. If even the FBI itself was infected, what part of justice remained pure? Victoria's voice cut through the tension. You wanted proof, Patterson? Here it is. Your bullet didn't silence me. It opened a floodgate the entire world is watching. Judge Brooks leaned forward, her face pale with the weight of what she was witnessing. Counselor Johnson, do you understand what this means? You're not just prosecuting a case anymore. You're standing at the center of the largest federal purge in history. Victoria nodded. I know exactly what it means. It means justice finally has teeth. The courtroom doors burst open again. Agent Adams strode in, her black jacket dusted with rain, a folder thick with fresh intelligence in her hands. She laid it on the judge's bench. Your Honor, she said firmly, Phase 4 is authorized. Immediate seizure of offshore accounts, international warrants issued, and foreign assets frozen. The network is collapsing worldwide. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Offshore accounts? International warrants? This wasn't just domestic, it was global. Patterson slammed his chained fists on the table. You fools. You think you've won, but this system is too big. For every arrest you show on those screens, another one of us slips into the shadows. You can't kill corruption. You can only chase it. Victoria stepped forward, her voice rising with unshakable resolve. Then we'll chase it. Every shadow. Every corner. Every country. Until there's nowhere left for people like you to hide. The gallery rose to its feet, applauding as if history itself were being written in front of them. Phones broadcasted live to millions. The world was watching. New York, London, Lagos, Karachi, Sydney. Hashtags trended globally in seconds. Hashtag cleanhouse. Hashtag justice prevails. Hashtag no more shadows. Victoria raised her torn jacket once more. This wound will heal. But the scar will remain, a reminder that justice costs blood, but corruption costs everything. The feeds behind her flashed images of senators, judges, and FBI agents in chains. For the first time in history, the untouchables were being touched, and America watched, breathless. This was no longer just a trial. It was a reckoning on a scale the nation had never seen. The screens in courtroom 6 shifted again, and the scale of what was happening expanded beyond imagination. This wasn't just America's purge anymore, it was global. Satellite feeds filled the monitors. London, MI5 agents storming a townhouse. Dubai, luxury villas raided by masked officers. Hong Kong, bank managers in suits dragged into armored vans. Every corner of the world was lighting up with arrests tied to Patterson's network. The DOJ official's voice rang out clear, his words echoing through the chamber like prophecy. Phase 4 is in motion. Foreign accounts are frozen. International warrants are being served. Operation Cleanhouse is no longer confined to our borders, it's worldwide. Gasps swept through the gallery. Reporters shouted into microphones, broadcasting the images to millions across the globe. This is history unfolding live, they whispered. Victoria rose from her seat, her bandaged shoulder stiff but her voice steady as stone. This was never just about one corrupt officer. Patterson's bullet was meant to protect a network that spanned oceans. But instead, it revealed the truth. Russia, China, Iran, cartels, syndicates, they all bought pieces of our justice. And today, we're seizing it back. The crowd erupted, phones raised high. Hashtags jumped across continents. Hashtag global cleanhouse. Hashtag justice unchained. Hashtag no safe haven. Patterson's face turned gray as the screens flashed bank statements, offshore transfers in rubles, yuan, and reals. One by one, the names of foreign shell companies appeared on the evidence board. This is impossible, he muttered, his chains rattling as he leaned forward. Those accounts were buried. Untouchable. You can't freeze what you can't find. Victoria turned slowly, her glare slicing through him like a blade. You underestimated us, Patterson. The same arrogance that made you pull that trigger is what blinded you. Nothing is untouchable when the world decides to clean house. The courtroom's massive screen divided into 4 live feeds. In Moscow, agents kicked open the doors of a lavish penthouse, pulling out a man in silk robes, a banker tied to the Castellano crime family. In Beijing, a senior state prosecutor was escorted out of his office in handcuffs, his face hidden behind a folder. In Tehran, a government official was shoved into a waiting van as crowds chanted outside. In Zurich, Swiss police seized a bank's entire vault. Crates of documents loaded into trucks marked Interpol. The gallery gasped as the scale of corruption revealed itself. Judge Brooks leaned back in her chair, eyes wide. Counselor Johnson, are you saying this isn't just a domestic scandal? That this is international espionage? Victoria's voice was ice. Yes, Your Honor. What started with one officer on courthouse steps was the cover for a global operation, foreign governments buying influence, organized crime buying verdicts, spies buying silence. The words sent shockwaves through the room. For the first time, everyone realized this wasn't just a trial. It was a battle for sovereignty itself. Patterson slammed the table, chains rattling like thunder. You'll burn it all down. Do you even realize what you've unleashed? Foreign governments will retaliate. Courts will collapse. You're not saving justice, you're destabilizing nations. Victoria leaned in, her voice sharp as a blade. Then let them fall. Because no nation built on corruption deserves to stand. The gallery roared, a standing ovation breaking out before marshals restored order. Cameras zoomed in, catching every angle, every tear. Every clenched fist raised in defiance. Agent Adams placed fresh evidence on the table, a crimson folder stamped classified, Interpol. She opened it for the judge. Your Honor, these are coordinated charges across 12 nations. Evidence ties Patterson's network to global arms trafficking, drug cartels, and even terrorism financing. Today isn't just about corruption, it's about dismantling the backbone of global organized crime. The courtroom froze. Victoria turned to the gallery, her voice swelling like a tide. Patterson thought one bullet could silence me. Instead, that bullet became the spark that lit the fuse of global justice. Look at these screens. Look at the arrests in Moscow, Beijing, Tehran, Zurich. This isn't chaos, it's history. Reporters scribbled frantically. Phones streamed live to millions across the world. For the first time in decades, people everywhere felt the system shifting beneath their feet, and Patterson, the man who fired that shot, sat chained and broken, watching as the empire he served crumbled on live screens. What began on courthouse steps was now rewriting the balance of power worldwide. The global feeds flickered across the screens. But inside courtroom 6, a new silence fell, thick, heavy, almost suffocating. Reporters leaned forward. Attorneys froze mid-note. Even Judge Brooks, normally a pillar of composure, folded her hands tightly as if bracing herself for what Victoria would say next. Victoria stepped into the center of the room. Her wounded shoulder stiff but her voice clear and unwavering. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've seen the money. We've seen the bribes. We've seen the offshore accounts. But none of that shows the real cost." She turned to the gallery, her eyes burning with fire. "The real cost is people. Victims who never received justice because Officer Patterson and his network sold it to the highest bidder." The lights dimmed, and the monitors behind her shifted from bank ledgers to faces. A young boy, barely 12. Killed in a drive-by shooting. His murderer walked free when Patterson's network lost the evidence. An elderly woman, her eyes hollow with grief. She lost her life savings to a fraudster who was acquitted after Patterson destroyed financial records. A mother clutching a photo of her daughter. Her trafficker was set free after witnesses were threatened. Each face appeared, each story delivered like a hammer striking steel. The courtroom was silent except for muffled sobs. Even hardened journalists wiped their eyes, their cameras trembling in their hands. Patterson gripped the defense table so hard his knuckles turned white. "Stop this," he rasped. "You can't parade victims like props. You don't understand." Victoria's gaze sliced into him. "Don't you dare call them props. These are people you failed. People you betrayed. People whose lives were destroyed because you chose bribes over duty." The crowd erupted in applause, marshals barely able to restore order. Judge Brooks leaned forward, her face lined with sorrow. "Counselor Johnson, how many?" Victoria inhaled deeply, her voice steady despite the weight of the number. 137. That's how many convicted criminals had their convictions overturned or sentences reduced through corrupted proceedings. 14 terrorists. 23 foreign agents. 47 organized crime figures. 53 violent felons. Gasps tore through the chamber. Phones shook in trembling hands as the numbers spread across social media within seconds. Victoria's voice sharpened. "And every one of those numbers is a name. Every name is a family. Every family is a life destroyed. Officer Patterson didn't just steal money, he stole futures. He stole trust. He stole safety." The screen behind her shifted again, showing mugshots of criminals Patterson had helped release: a drug kingpin, a charity embezzler, a human trafficker. Each face was a scar carved into the justice system. Victoria turned back to the judge. "Your Honor, this isn't about corruption in ledgers. This is about blood in the streets. This is about children who never made it home. This is about families who live with loss every day while criminals laughed free." The gallery broke. Sobs and shouts filled the chamber. "Justice for them!" Someone cried. "No more shadows!" Another voice echoed. Patterson lowered his head, sweat dripping down his temples. For the first time, his bravado cracked. His lips trembled, his eyes darting like a trapped animal. You don't know what it's like," he muttered. "I didn't start it. I was told. I had no choice." Victoria took a slow step toward him, her bandage stained with fresh blood. "No choice? You had 18 years of choices. And every single time, you chose corruption. Don't you dare hide behind excuses." The words sliced the air. Patterson flinched as though struck. Judge Brooks lifted her gavel but didn't strike it. Her voice was low, grave. "Mr. Patterson, this court is not a confessional. This court is where choices meet consequences." Agent Adams moved forward, placing another file on the evidence table. Her voice was grim. "Your Honor, these are victim impact statements, hundreds of them. Families writing in their own words about what Patterson's corruption cost them." Victoria opened the first letter and read aloud. "My brother was killed by a man who should have been behind bars. But the officer who took the bribe let him walk free. We buried my brother while his killer celebrated in the streets." The courtroom broke into sobs again. Victoria looked up, her voice carrying across the chamber. "This is the true cost. Not the millions stolen. Not the judges bribed. But the lives shattered. And Patterson thought one bullet could hide it all." She raised her torn jacket once more. "This scar is proof that he failed. That no matter how hard corruption tries to silence truth, truth will always rise louder." The gallery rose in thunderous applause. phones flashing like lightning as the world watched a courtroom transformed into a stage for justice. The courtroom was still trembling from the weight of the victim's stories when all eyes turned back to Patterson. His chains clinked as he shifted in his seat, his once defiant posture now slumped. Sweat streamed down his face, dripping onto the wooden defense table. His lips quivered as though the weight of the silence pressing in on him was unbearable. Finally, his voice cracked. "Stop, just stop." The gallery hushed. The world seemed to lean closer through 1,000 live feeds. "I can't," Patterson stammered. "I can't watch those faces anymore. You think I don't see them when I close my eyes? You think I don't hear the screams?" Victoria didn't blink. She stood tall, her wounded shoulder throbbing, her jacket clutched in her hand like a banner of truth. "Then why did you keep doing it?" Patterson's eyes darted, searching for an answer that wasn't there. His voice rose, ragged, broken. "Because it was never just me. You think I ran this? I was a pawn, just one man caught in a machine bigger than all of us." The gallery gasped. Cameras zoomed in, the confession streaming live to millions. Patterson slammed his shackled fists against the table. "They told me what to do. They told me who to protect. They told me which cases to bury. If I didn't obey, I'd be finished. My family," his voice cracked. "They threatened my family." Victoria's tone was razor-sharp. "Who, Patterson? Who gave the orders?" His face twisted between fear and rage. "Judges, prosecutors, agents. Names you wouldn't believe." He turned toward the judge, eyes bloodshot. "Even some of yours, Brooks. The bench isn't clean either." The courtroom erupted. Marshals moved instantly to restore order, but the whispers roared like thunder. "He's naming judges? He's naming prosecutors." Judge Brooks's gavel slammed, but her face betrayed the storm beneath her calm. "Order. This courtroom will remain in order." Patterson's voice grew wilder. "I kept records. I wrote it all down because I knew this day would come. Every bribe, every call, every deal, documented. They laughed at me for being too careful, but I knew one day someone would try to make me the fall guy. And here we are." Victoria's eyes locked onto him, cold and steady. "Where are the records?" Patterson exhaled, his shoulders sagging. "In my locker. Bank vault on East 47th, codes written inside my badge." Gasps swept the gallery. Phones buzzed as the revelation hit social media in real time. #The ledger began trending instantly. Agent Adams shot a glance at her team. Within seconds, an officer bolted from the courtroom, phone to ear, already dispatching a recovery team. Victoria stepped closer, her voice quieter now but no less sharp. "You had a choice, Patterson. Every day. Every file you destroyed, every witness you threatened, every bribe you took, you chose corruption." Patterson's voice dropped to a whisper, tears streaking his face. I know what I became. But you don't understand, the machine never stops. Even now, if you think it ends with me, you're wrong. There are others. Above me. Above all of us." Victoria slammed her briefcase shut with a crack that echoed through the courtroom. "Then we'll bring them down too." The gallery exploded in cheers, chants of justice. "Justice." Rattling the marble walls, Judge Brooks leaned forward, her voice grave. "Mr. Patterson, you've just confessed on the record to conspiracy, bribery, obstruction, and abuse of power. Do you understand what that means?" Patterson let out a bitter laugh through his tears. "It means my life's over. But maybe, just maybe, the truth finally got out." He collapsed into his chair, sobbing quietly. The image was seared into every phone screen streaming live, a once powerful officer reduced to a broken man. Shackled and shattered by the very justice he betrayed. Victoria turned back to the gallery, her voice carrying the weight of history. "This is what corruption does. It eats from within until there's nothing left. But today, we've proven that justice can fight back." The applause thundered like an earthquake, the courtroom buzzed with a nervous energy as Patterson slumped back in his chair, his sobs echoing faintly beneath the roar of the gallery. But the real storm was just beginning. The double doors swung open with force. Agent Adams strode in, flanked by 2 marshals carrying a heavy black evidence case. The sight of it silenced the crowd instantly. "Your Honor," Adams declared, her voice firm, "we have recovered Officer Patterson's vault." Gasps rippled through the room. Reporters scrambled to their feet, cameras zooming in as the marshal set the case down on the evidence table with a metallic thud that seemed to shake the floor itself. Patterson's head shot up, his face pale. "No," he whispered. His chains rattled as he leaned forward desperately. "You don't understand, don't open it. If you do, this whole system collapses." Victoria stepped forward, her eyes unflinching. "Then let it collapse. Justice demands it." She snapped the case open. Inside was a thick black ledger, its worn leather cover scarred from years of handling. Alongside it lay a bundle of USB drives and a sealed envelope marked "Do Not Open," for insurance only. The gallery held its collective breath. Victoria lifted the ledger with both hands, holding it high for the entire courtroom to see. "This," she said, her voice cutting through the silence, "is the heart of the machine." She set it down and flipped it open. The pages were filled with names, dates, dollar amounts, meticulously written in Patterson's own handwriting. Judges, prosecutors, defense attorneys, agents. Every transaction, every deal, every betrayal. Judge Brooks leaned forward, her face pale. "Counselor Johnson, whose names are in that book?" Victoria's eyes scanned the first page. Her voice rang out like a bell. "Federal Judge Robert Anderson. U.S. Prosecutor Jennifer Davis. FBI Special Agent Marcus Thompson." Gasps and shouts exploded across the room. Marshals struggled to contain the chaos as reporters shouted into microphones, their voices trembling. Patterson thrashed in his chains, his voice breaking. "I told you. I kept records for protection. If that book ever saw daylight, we're all finished." Victoria's glare locked onto him. "No, Patterson. You're finished. This book isn't your protection, it's your destruction." She turned the pages, each one worse than the last. Offshore transfers. Case numbers tied to bribes. Signatures of corrupt officials. It was a blueprint of the network in its entirety. Agent Adams connected one of the USB drives to the courtroom's display system. The screens lit up with scanned copies of the ledger, synchronized with bank records, emails, and recorded calls. The gallery gasped again as names scrolled across the monitors, names that reached far beyond one courthouse. Victoria's voice rose above the chaos. "This ledger ties corruption not just to this building, but across 12 federal districts. It shows collusion with organized crime, foreign intelligence, and corporate entities. The network wasn't just local. It was national." Judge Brooks gripped her gavel tightly, her eyes fixed on the screens. "Counselor Johnson, do you understand the magnitude of what you've just presented?" Victoria nodded, her face grim. "Yes, Your Honor. What we hold in our hands isn't just evidence. It's the confession of a system that sold justice for profit." Patterson finally broke, his voice desperate, pleading. "You don't know what you've unleashed. This will tear the country apart. Whole courts will crumble, agencies will fall. Do you want anarchy?" Victoria snapped the ledger shut with a thunderous crack. "Better to rebuild on truth than rot in lies." The gallery erupted again, chants of "justice, justice," shaking the marble walls as the world watched history unfold. The air was electric. Not just in the courtroom, but across the nation. News outlets cut into their regular programming with breaking, "Justice System in Freefall," banners flashing in red. The feed from inside the courtroom, now broadcast live, had become the single most watched event in the country's history. Judge Brooks stood frozen, hand clenched around her gavel. Her face was unreadable, but her eyes were burning with something deeper than shock. It was resolve. She turned toward Agent Adams. "Is the Department of Justice aware of this?" "They are now," Adams replied flatly. "And they've authorized immediate action." Within moments, a second team of marshals stormed into the courtroom. Led by a stoic senior officer holding a sealed federal order, Victoria stepped back as the lead marshal walked up to the bench. "By order of the Inspector General," he announced, "Federal Judge Robert Anderson is under immediate investigation for obstruction of justice, racketeering, and conspiracy." Gasps shook the gallery. Judge Anderson, seated behind the rows of benches, blanched. You can't be serious." But he was already surrounded. His robe fell to the floor as he was handcuffed in front of the cameras. Then came the prosecutor. U.S. Prosecutor Jennifer Davis, the marshal called. "You are also under federal investigation. You are ordered to surrender your license and comply with immediate arrest." Jennifer's face crumbled. "This can't be happening," she whispered, but made no move to resist. Her heels clacked against the polished floor as she was led out, a woman once feared, now silent. One by one, names were read from the ledger, each one followed by an arrest. Agents, court clerks, former witnesses, people who had once stood as pillars of law, now exposed as co-conspirators in a web of rot outside the courthouse. The plaza had filled with hundreds, soon thousands, of people chanting, crying, live streaming, and witnessing history. Inside, Patterson had gone pale. "They'll come for me now," he mumbled. "They'll kill me before this is over." Victoria didn't even turn to look at him. "That's not my problem anymore." The entire courtroom echoed with applause. Judge Brooks rose from her bench, her face fierce. "I hereby place this entire docket under federal review. All cases previously handled by the named individuals are suspended pending further investigation." She paused. "And let it be known, this court will no longer serve corruption." The gavel slammed. A bang. Bang. Banged out. A new era had begun. The dust was still settling inside the courtroom. Yet the echoes of revolution hadn't faded. Arrests had been made. A corrupt system had cracked. And in the center of it all, still handcuffed, still sweating, was the man who thought he'd get away with everything. Patterson, slumped against the defendant's table. He looked nothing like the smug orchestrator of injustice who had once controlled the courtroom. His designer suit was wrinkled, his lips dry, and for the first time, his voice was small. "Victoria." He rasped. "Please. I didn't know how far it would go." Victoria Lancaster, still standing tall, stepped closer, her heels echoing like thunder across the marble floor. The cameras were still rolling. The world was still watching. And for this moment, justice had a face. "Oh, you didn't know?" she said, voice sharp. "Didn't know when you threatened families? When you forged witness statements? When you sent innocent people to prison while cashing checks from private contractors?" Patterson tried to lift his head, but the shame was heavier than the chains around his wrists. "I was part of something bigger," he whispered. "If I refused, they'd have ruined me too." Victoria didn't flinch. "You were already ruined. You just didn't know it." He broke. Tears welled up. I have kids, Victoria. A wife. Please." But Victoria's face was stone. "You never thought about the kids of the people you framed. Never thought about the mothers crying outside these courtrooms. Never thought about the fathers locked away for crimes they didn't commit. You want mercy now?" He looked up, broken. "Yes." Victoria stepped forward, right into the spotlight of the courtroom's center. Her next words weren't just for Patterson. They were for every child who had watched their parents taken. Every protester who had been silenced. Every voice choked by a corrupt system. "You'll get a fair trial," she said. "That's more than you ever gave anyone else." Outside, thunder rolled, but the sky was clear. The chants from outside grew louder. "Justice for all. Lancaster for justice. No more silence." Inside, a young court reporter who had been watching quietly all morning leaned over to her colleague. "She didn't just bring down a corrupt attorney," the reporter whispered. "She brought down the whole damn machine." As federal agents began escorting Patterson out, he turned one last time to Victoria. "Why'd you come back?" he asked weakly. "Why risk everything?" Victoria didn't smile. But her eyes burned with truth. "Because someone had to. And because I never left," she said. "I just waited until the world was finally ready to listen." Outside the courthouse, the doors burst open. Dozens of marshals emerged first, followed by the line of the arrested, Judge Anderson, Jennifer Davis, Patterson, and several others, all now prisoners of the system they once ruled. The crowd went silent for a moment. And then roared. The people had waited. They had prayed. And they had witnessed it, the day the courtroom was reclaimed, not by lawyers, not by politics, but by truth. Across the country, social media exploded. Breaking, Patterson arrested. Full confession caught on camera. Hashtag Victoria Lancaster trends at #1 for third day. Judge Anderson's rulings reopened for federal review. DOJ promises sweep of all private prison ties. What comes next for America's courts? Later that night, in a quiet moment, Victoria sat alone on a courthouse bench. The world was celebrating, but she wasn't celebrating. Not yet. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through the names from the ledger. Not every name had been arrested. Some were still out there. Some were powerful. A hand touched her shoulder. It was Agent Adams. "You did it," he said softly. Victoria shook her head. "We started something. That's all." He nodded. "So what happens now?" She looked up. Her voice was quiet. "Calm. Steady now," she said. "We finish what they tried to bury." The courtroom was quiet now. The cameras shut off. The gallery cleared. But the impact? It thundered across continents. Victoria Lancaster stood once more in her office, no longer a whisper in the system. Now, a symbol. Across her wall, headlines glowed from digital screens. Rolled up newspaper. America's legal reckoning begins. Rolled up newspaper. The woman who broke the gavel. Rolled up newspaper. From silence to storm. The Ledger trial goes global. Rolled up newspaper. Victoria Lancaster, the face of a new justice. But this wasn't just about her. It had never been. The global tidal wave. Within 48 hours, watchdog groups across the UK, Canada, and Brazil launched investigations into their own judicial systems. A court in Johannesburg reopened 4 wrongful conviction cases within hours of the U.S. arrests. In Geneva, the United Nations Human Rights Council called an emergency session. For the first time in 2 decades, the U.S. was placed under special review for systemic legal corruption. Ambassadors whispered that it wouldn't have happened without that courtroom video. Without her, Victoria watched the live stream from her tablet. "This is bigger than one courtroom," she whispered. "This is the world asking who's next." Corporate collapse. And it wasn't just governments. By day 3, 4 major U.S. tech firms had announced plans to sever all contracts with private prison corporations. Share prices dropped. CEOs scrambled. Activists surged forward, even the banks got nervous. The contractor who paid Patterson? Their CEO had just resigned mid-interview. And for the first time, class action lawsuits began forming from inside prison walls, filed not just by lawyers, but by people who had once been silenced by the same broken bench. One whisper from Lancaster had become a global scream. The people returned that evening, in cities across the U.S. Candlelight vigils formed in front of courthouses. In Atlanta, an 8-year-old girl held a cardboard sign, "My dad comes home next." In Oakland, a retired judge stood beside former inmates and wept. "We could have stopped this years ago," he said. "She just made us look." And in Chicago? The courthouse where it all began? Someone had spray-painted a single phrase across the marble steps in crimson red: "The bench doesn't belong to you anymore." Back to the beginning. Victoria stood in front of her childhood home the next morning, an old, cracked brick house with a rusted fence and worn grass. It wasn't far from the courthouse. But it was a world away. Her mother, Dolores Lancaster, opened the screen door, arms crossed, face stern. "Took you long enough," she muttered. Victoria cracked a smile. Was waiting for a reason. Her mother didn't return the smile, at first. But as they sat at the kitchen table, sipping tea, Dolores reached across and touched her daughter's hand. "You didn't just fight the devil," she said softly. "You made him confess. That takes more than fire. That takes faith." A new kind of justice. The following week, a federal judicial reform bill passed in the House, named after a case Victoria had tried years ago and lost. The Lancaster Accountability Act included white heavy checkmark real-time public case reviews, white heavy checkmark ban on private prison kickbacks, white heavy checkmark mandatory oversight on prosecutorial conduct, white heavy checkmark a new AI-driven audit system for courtroom biases, and at the center of the reform task force, Victoria Lancaster. Unpaid. Unapologetic. "This isn't about legacy," she told the press. "It's about restoration." The final meeting in a private meeting room inside the Department of Justice, Victoria met with Attorney General Solis. "You've rattled the cage," Solis said. "The whole damn country's on fire." Victoria nodded. "Then let it burn. At least now the rats are visible." Solis leaned back. "They're going to come after you." "I hope they do," Victoria said. "Because I'll still be standing." She left him in silence. Epilogue. The bench reclaimed. Months later, a new courtroom opened downtown, built with transparency walls, public access galleries, and a rotating panel of citizen observers, and carved into the wall behind the judge's bench, in bold steel letters, "Power belongs not to the gavel, but to the truth that wields it." The first judge to sit behind it, Victoria Lancaster, but only for one case. She stood, took the bench, looked around at the quiet room, and smiled, then handed her robe to a young attorney in the front row, because her mission had never been to keep the seat, only to make it safe again. Star.